They say kids can be cruel, but sometimes adults are worse, especially when they choose not to look deeper. In room 4B, everyone knew who smelled different, and everyone knew to stay away. 12-year-old Elijah Mwangi sat alone. Always did. While the other kids played tag or passed notes, he just scribbled on paper, his back hunched, trying to stay invisible. Ugh, what does that smell? Laughter. Whispers. The sound of chairs scraping as kids shifted away from him. The teacher, Miss Rebecca, didn't say a word, just opened a window and carried on with the lesson. No one asked why Elijah smelled the way he did. No one cared, except one man, and he would change everything. It started small. Note stuffed in his locker. Ever heard of soap? Do you live in a dumpster? Skunk boy. But it got worse. During gym, someone threw his shoes in the trash. Another time, a classmate poured perfume in his backpack and screamed, "I'm doing the world a favor." Elijah didn't cry. He never did. Not in public. He just walked home silently. Principal Victor Mbatha, tall and commanding, watched from a distance. The boy intrigued him, not for the scent, but for the silence, the way Elijah endured the cruelty. There was something unsettling about it, not pathetic, not broken, just still, like a storm before it roars. One Friday afternoon, Principal Mbatha had had enough. "Elijah," he called, as the boy walked past the office. Elijah froze. He'd never been called to the principal's office before, and now the room felt 10 times colder. "I'm going to drive you home," Mbatha said softly. Elijah's eyes widened. "But why?" "No one's ever asked what's going on. I want to know." The car ride was quiet, until they pulled into a neighborhood Mbatha had only seen on the news. No running water. Power lines hung like cobwebs. Half the houses were missing windows. Children played with bottle caps and broken toys. A dog barked in the distance. Skinny, wounded. Elijah didn't say a word. He opened a rusted gate, led the principal to a crumbling house with cracked paint and plastic sheets for windows. Inside was a shock. There was no furniture, just a thin mattress, 2 broken chairs, and a plastic bucket. That bucket, Mbatha soon learned, was where Elijah and his younger siblings bathed. No running water, no gas, a leaking roof, and mother, thin, frail, coughing, working 2 jobs and still unable to keep the lights on. "Do you understand now?" Elijah whispered. His voice wasn't angry, just tired. Mbatha swallowed hard. His pride as an educator shattered. This wasn't laziness. It wasn't poor hygiene. It was poverty. Deep, gnawing poverty. The kind that eats your dignity and silences your cries. That night, Principal Mbatha couldn't sleep, and by morning he had a plan. 3 days later, the media stood outside Elijah's school. "Why are we here?" one reporter muttered. Then Principal Mbatha stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady but fierce, "this is not a school announcement. This is a call to conscience." He held up Elijah's worn backpack, showed pictures of the house, and detailed the bullying the boy endured, not to shame the school, but to shame the silence, to shame the systems that let kids fall through, to shame every adult who saw the signs and looked away, and the nation listened. Sometimes a story breaks the internet, but this one broke hearts. Within 24 hours, Elijah's story had been shared across the country. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Elijah and hashtag Smell of Survival trended on social media. News anchors called him the boy who endured in silence. Influencers recorded tearful tributes. Foundations pledged to help. But while the world reacted in shock and sorrow, Elijah stayed silent. The camera crews came, yes. They asked questions, yes. But Elijah barely spoke, because while the world finally saw him, he knew it was only the beginning. The deeper story hadn't been told. Not yet. Elijah had secrets. Not just poverty, but pain. Hidden in memories no child should carry. At 8 years old, he'd watched his father walk out. But before that, the man had done worse. Whispers of fists slamming against walls. Screams muffled in the night. his mother bruised, Elijah hiding under the table with his baby sister, holding her tiny hands. When the man left, they all thought it would get better, but the scars didn't heal. His mother spiraled, depression, exhaustion, disappearing shifts at her 2 jobs. And Elijah, he became a man too early. Cooking, cleaning, keeping his siblings alive. He didn't just smell of sweat and hunger. He smelled of survival. The students who once mocked him now stared from a distance. Some whispered sorry. Some tried to hand him snacks. One even offered to sit beside him at lunch. But Elijah didn't smile. He didn't scream. He didn't hit. He simply said, "If you saw me dying before, why are you pretending to care now?" Silence fell, and for the first time in weeks, no one laughed, not even the teachers. Principal Mbatha gathered the entire staff after school. Some fidgeted. Some avoided eye contact. Others murmured complaints about how they didn't know, or the boy never spoke up. Mbatha slammed a folder on the desk. "It's not a child's job to explain their poverty to you. It's your job to notice." No one replied. He paced slowly. "We failed him. All of us. But we won't fail again. Not just him, any of them." That night, teachers left heavy-hearted, and one, Miss Rebecca, cried quietly in her car. She remembered the open window, the joke she ignored, the days she turned her face. She knew Elijah had seen her turn. Elijah returned home to find something unusual. His house, once silent, now buzzed with movement. Volunteers painting the walls. Engineers fixing the plumbing. A new bed arriving through the door. Groceries on the counter. Principal Mbatha stood in the corner, smiling. But Elijah didn't move. "Why?" the boy asked softly. Mbatha knelt. "Because you shouldn't suffer for what others ignored." A tear slid down Elijah's face. Not for the food, not for the bed, but for the fact that, for once, someone stayed. In a box beneath his mattress, Elijah kept a journal, worn, torn, filled with observations, dreams, drawings, pages of classmates drawn as monsters, a full poem about being invisible, and one chilling page. "If I die, they'll only notice when my seat smells worse." Principal Mbatha read it. His hands shook. He took the journal to the school counselor. "This isn't just sadness," she whispered. "It's deep trauma, the kind that doesn't heal without help." And so began Elijah's quiet journey to healing, with therapy sessions, art workshops, and one-on-one check-ins. Not to erase the past, but to finally name it. As weeks passed, the headlines changed. Elijah's story was old news. A new scandal took over, but the boy was still healing. The world moved on, but he still woke up at 4 a.m., checking if his siblings were breathing, still flinched at loud knocks, still hoarded food under his bed, just in case. Principal Mbatha noticed. So did Miss Rebecca, who had started visiting Elijah's home every Sunday. One afternoon, she brought books, not textbooks, stories, fantasy, magic, distant lands. Elijah opened one, read 2 pages, then asked, "Can I borrow more?" A tiny crack of light. 3 months after the press conference, Principal Mbatha called for a school assembly, not for rules, not for punishments, but for truth. He invited Elijah to speak. The boy hesitated. Then, one afternoon, he stood at the podium, eyes on him, phones recording, whispers everywhere. He began, "You laughed at my smell, but you didn't ask what I was walking through. I smelled bad because I was holding 2 jobs at home, cooking, cleaning, raising my siblings while watching my mother collapse from exhaustion. I smelled bad because I walked 3 miles to fetch water every day, before and after school. You laughed because you thought I was weak, but I'm still standing." Dead silence, then applause, and for the first time ever, Elijah smiled. A month later, Principal Mbatha received a call from a wealthy philanthropist. She'd seen Elijah's story, had grown up in a similar place. She donated 10 million naira to build a new wing in the school, the Elijah Mwangi Resilience Center. Focus on counseling, free meals, hygiene, and emergency support. No plaques, no fame, just impact. When Elijah found out, he didn't celebrate. He just whispered, "Maybe the next kid won't have to be me." Then came the twist no one expected. One day, as Elijah helped distribute donated toiletries to younger kids, a new student arrived. Nervous, dirty, silent. Elijah recognized that look. The shrinking posture, the way the boy sniffed himself and sat alone. Elijah walked over, sat beside him. "I'm Elijah," he said. The boy blinked. "I smell bad." Elijah chuckled. "So did I. Now I help others like me." That moment, that was the true power shift. Because Elijah wasn't just a survivor anymore. He had become the rescuer. Every light cast a shadow. And with Elijah's rise, envy followed. Among the students, one voice grew bitter. Daniel, the class prefect. He had always basked in praise. Clean uniform, perfect scores, and politician parents. But now, Elijah was the school's hero. The boy who once sat alone now had teachers shaking his hand and cameras following him. And Daniel couldn't take it. One afternoon, he slipped a voice note into the school group chat. His voice mocking. "Let's stop pretending. The hero still stinks. He's just a media puppet. Remove the cameras, and he's back to being street trash." The message spread like wildfire. Elijah read it and didn't say a word. But this time, silence wasn't weakness. It was a warning. The next morning, Daniel strutted into school, expecting laughs. Instead, the entire class stared in disgust, then stood up, one by one. The same classmates who once mocked Elijah now stood in his defense. Even the teachers joined. But the final blow came from someone Daniel never expected, Miss Rebecca. She walked in, slammed her phone on the desk, and played Daniel's voice note on speaker, then turned to him. "You think this makes you strong? Elijah survived things you couldn't imagine. You couldn't survive a week in his shoes." Literally, Daniel stammered. It was just a joke. So was every insult he endured, until he almost took his own life. The room fell silent. Daniel was suspended, and Elijah, he still didn't speak. But his eyes said it all. "I don't need revenge. The world is doing it for me." 3 days later, Principal Mbatha received a call from the Federal Ministry of Education. They wanted Elijah to join a national panel on child poverty and education. "He's young," they said, "but he speaks louder than most adults." Elijah hesitated. "Why me?" Principal Mbatha smiled. "Because your pain turned into purpose, and the country needs to hear that." Elijah boarded a flight for the first time in his life, no longer running from something, but towards something bigger. In Abuja, Elijah sat across from a top journalist. Cameras rolling. She leaned in. "Elijah, you become a symbol. But what do you want the world to understand most?" He paused, then answered, "Poverty doesn't always look like hunger. Sometimes it smells. Sometimes it hides behind good grades. Sometimes it sits quietly at the back of the class, hoping no one notices. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted to be safe. Clean. Heard. No one asked. So I'm asking now, who else are we ignoring?" The clip went viral. Again. But this time, governors, NGOs, and international foundations reached out. And Elijah, he didn't ask for donations. He asked for systems. Elijah returned to his neighborhood with a briefcase full of notebooks and plans. He walked through the same dusty street. But something had changed. Neighbors waved. Strangers whispered, "That's the boy on TV." But Elijah didn't bask in fame. He walked straight to his old shack, now refurbished, and hugged his mother. "I'm not done yet," he whispered, then turned to his siblings. "We're going to fix more than our house. We're fixing others, too." Behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. The local council chairman, who had ignored Elijah's family for years, now felt threatened. "Who does this boy think he is?" he snapped at his aides. "He's making us look bad." In secret, he called for a review of Elijah's story, claimed it was exaggerated. A rumor was planted. Maybe Elijah faked the whole poverty thing. Maybe it was all for fame. The press picked it up. Suddenly, Elijah was under fire. Again. But this time he was ready. Elijah didn't shout. He didn't fight back with rage. He simply opened a folder. Hospital records, social welfare documents, power outage logs, pictures of home, time-stamped and geotagged. Then, a final blow, a letter from a nonprofit worker who had been visiting the family for years, confirming the depth of their hardship. The rumor collapsed, but the chairman? Exposed. People started asking, where was he during all this? A month later, the chairman was removed from office for corruption. Justice, poetic and precise. They called it the Elijah effect. Across Nigeria, schools started launching hygiene corners. Nonprofits began installing showers in slums. Children who once suffered in silence were being interviewed, supported, and, most importantly, believed. One headline read, "The boy who smelled bad changed a nation's nose." But Elijah never smiled at the praise. He said, "If it took my shame to bring change, I'm okay with that. But let's make sure no one else has to be the sacrifice." One afternoon, Elijah received a letter. No name, no return address. Just one line. "I'm sorry. I was your father. I wasn't a man back then. But you are more man than I ever became." Elijah stared at it. No emotion. He folded it and placed it in the back of his journal, not as forgiveness, but as a reminder of what he rose from. Years later, Elijah stood before a crowd, not as a boy mocked for smelling, but as Elijah Mwangi, director of a National Child Welfare Foundation. His siblings sat in the front row, cheering. His mother, now healthy, clutched a handkerchief, wiping tears. He spoke. "You called me names. You tried to shrink me. But I grew anyway, not despite the pain, but because of it. And now, I won't let another child be forgotten." The crowd rose, a standing ovation, but Elijah simply nodded and walked off stage, because the mission wasn't over. They say time heals all wounds. But Elijah knew some scars never fade. They simply remind us of how far we've come. Years had passed. And yet, one afternoon, Elijah found himself back in room 4B, his old classroom, the same window where Miss Rebecca once opened it to chase out his scent, the same corner where he sat alone. The new teacher, young and eager, introduced him to the students. This is a man whose story changed everything. The children clapped, but Elijah didn't beam. Instead, he walked to the very last seat, his old seat, and sat down. He whispered, "No child should ever feel small in this chair again." After the classroom visit, Miss Rebecca, now retired, approached Elijah with a letter in hand. "I wrote this years ago," she said, trembling, "but I never had the courage to give it to you." Elijah opened it. "Dear Elijah, I failed you. I was supposed to protect you, but I chose silence over compassion. I watched you suffer, and I did nothing. I'm so sorry. I hope someday you can forgive me, not for me, but for you, so you can let go of that weight." Elijah looked at her, then said, "I already did. That's why I'm still standing." Miss Rebecca cried in his arms. Principal Mbatha had grown older. The silver in his beard had spread, and his energy now burned slower. Elijah found him one evening sitting on the school's rooftop, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. "I'm retiring," Mbatha said. Elijah blinked. "You're the reason this all started." Mbatha smiled. "No, Elijah, you are." Then he handed Elijah a box. Inside were photographs of Elijah handing out hygiene kits, speaking at rallies, hugging street kids. Mbatha whispered, "I kept every moment, because I knew one day the world would need proof that you were real." Elijah's eyes filled with tears. "I'll take it from here," he promised. That year, Elijah was invited to an international humanitarian gala in Geneva. Global leaders, billionaires, celebrities. The host introduced him. "From the slums of Lagos to the hearts of the world, please welcome Elijah Mwangi." He walked onto the stage in a tailored suit, but under it, he still wore the old bracelet made of plastic beads his little sister once gave him. He began his speech. "Once, I was mocked for how I smelled. Now, I help thousands feel clean, safe, and seen. Never underestimate the power of the invisible, because when they rise like thunder. The crowd erupted, but Elijah just bowed his head. One morning, a stranger showed up at Elijah's foundation office. Tall, older, worn. It was him, Elijah's father. "I just want to see them," he said. "The kids. Your mom. Just once." Elijah stared. "No," he replied. "You made a choice, and we lived through it." The man nodded, humiliated, but Elijah added softly, "You don't deserve them, but I pray you become someone who would." And with that, he walked away, not out of anger, but peace, because true power isn't in vengeance, it's in letting go. In partnership with several donors, Elijah launched the Silent Chair Initiative, a program that awarded full scholarships to underprivileged children who had endured bullying, neglect, or trauma. But there was one rule. Every school that applied had to set aside the Elijah seat, a symbolic desk reserved to honor every child once forgotten, and schools across the continent joined. Now, kids who once had their pain had a place that told them, "We see you, we hear you, we believe in you." On Elijah's 25th birthday, his foundation threw a surprise celebration. There were speeches, there was cake, there were tears, but one moment froze everyone. A young girl, around 8 years old, stepped forward, shy, nervous. She handed Elijah a crumpled drawing. It was of a boy sitting in the rain, but with light glowing from his chest. "I drew this for you," she whispered, "because you saved me." Elijah knelt. "What's your name?" "Naomi." Elijah smiled. "Naomi, you're the reason I keep going." But not everyone cheered Elijah's rise. One day, the board of a major international partner demanded Elijah shift his messaging. "Stop focusing on trauma," one said. "It makes donors uncomfortable." Another added, "You're too raw, too emotional. Be more polished." Elijah stood up. Children aren't a brand, and poverty isn't a PR campaign. If truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe you're part of the problem. The room went quiet. Elijah walked out. By the next morning, he had launched his own funding platform, Rooted Voices. In 1 week, it raised more than the donor had given in 2 years. The people believed in truth. Years later, Elijah bought land in his old neighborhood. He built a state-of-the-art learning center, clean water, tech labs, mental health support. The name? Hope After Silence Academy. And on its gate, engraved in bold letters, "The world may forget you, but here, you are never invisible." One evening, Elijah walked through his old street, now paved, children playing with kites and bikes. He passed the house he grew up in, now repainted, reinforced. He placed his hand on the gate and whispered, "We made it." His younger siblings, now in college, joined him on the porch. They sat, laughed, ate boiled corn and groundnuts like old times. There was no camera, no microphone, just peace. They mocked him for smelling, but what they smelled was resilience. They said he didn't belong, but he built a world of belonging. They turned their backs, but he turned their silence into a revolution. Because sometimes the most broken voice becomes the loudest echo, and sometimes the boy they laugh at becomes the man the world listens to. So next time you see a child who smells, who's quiet, who walks alone, don't just look away. Ask why, because the next Elijah is watching.